if you've been in the waiting rooms of life, waiting for God to come through, God wants to speak to you today through His Word, wherever you are. So we see that Habakkuk the prophet had a vision from God that God was going to come through and answer his prayers. But he looked all around and he saw that injustice prevailed. It seemed like evil was triumphing, and God's good people weren't being provided for, and it seemed like everything was just upside down, and Habakkuk was wondering, God, when are you going to come through? God, what's happening here? I don't see my prayers being answered. And God spoke this to him, and He speaks it to you wherever you are. But these things I plan won't happen right away. Slowly, steadily, surely the time approaches when the vision will be fulfilled. If it seems slow, do not despair, for these things will surely come to pass. Just be patient. They will not be overdue a single day. God gives Habakkuk this promise that He's going to come through and set everything straight, that He's going to answer all his prayers, and His promises will come true. And God says it's going to happen at just the right time, God's standard time. But then He gives the prophet a warning. He says God's standard time may not always seem like the right time to you at times. It may not seem like the perfect time to you at times, but it is. And He says if it seems slow to you, don't give up, don't despair. It's going to happen. Just be patient. The problem is we hate to wait. Whether it's at the doctor's office or sitting in traffic on I-45 or it's waiting for a table at a restaurant, we as human beings hate to wait, and we especially struggle with waiting on God. Have you ever been in a hurry when God wasn't? And you're, God, I know you're going to come through, and I'm praying this really godly prayer. I know it's your will. So where are you? Why aren't you coming through? And you're in the waiting room of life. And you realize that God's standard time is not always running on my time. And I have to realign my human clock to God's clock. So how do I know that I can trust God's standard time? How do I know that God's timing is always perfect? Let me give you several reasons that will encourage you. First, God created time and He rules over it. God created all things, including time and space. In Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So God created time, and therefore He stands outside of time and He rules over time. He's not limited by time and space. You know, we're limited by time, and our time is limited. But God created time and space, so He stands outside of it. And He's not limited by it. He's in the past, present, and future all at the same time. You don't have to worry about the future because God is already there. God rules over time because He created it. And Genesis 1:1 reminds us that God created something out of nothing. Theologians call this creation ex nihilo. Ex nihilo is just a Latin term that means out of nothing. Human beings can be really creative. We can be very creative, but we require materials from which to build something. We can't create something out of nothing. We have to have some matter, some materials in order to create. But God doesn't need anything in order to create. And that's why we can trust God that His timing is always perfect, because when it seems like time has run out and there is no hope, God can create hope where there is no hope. God can create love where there's no love. God can create peace where there's no peace. God can create life where there's no life. He doesn't need anything in which to create with. He can create something out of nothing. And when there is no hope, God can create hope. So we can trust Him that His timing is perfect. Another reason why we can trust God's perfect timing is God operates on an eternal calendar. God doesn't operate on Central Standard Time or Eastern Standard Time. He operates on eternal standard time. He has an eternal perspective. He sees the big picture. In Psalm 91, it says, Lord, through all the generations, you have been our home. Before the mountains were created, before the earth was formed, you are God without beginning or end. God is without beginning or end. He stands outside of time. He's not limited by time and space. He knows the future. He's already there. And he has this eternal perspective where he sees the long view. He sees the big picture. The problem is we want everything instantly because all we can see is the here and now. We're limited by time and we can't see into the future. All we can see is the here and now, and we want things right away. And it causes us to make a lot of bad decisions that create all kinds of problems in our lives. And that's when we have to align our clocks to God's clock. We have to synchronize our hearts to God's standard time because he knows the future. He sees it all. And we can only make good decisions when we're seeking him and praying for his will and for his direction in our lives, because all we can see is the here and now. And we get so impatient. We want to hurry God up and we want things right now. And it causes us to make a lot of bad decisions. God doesn't have a 4 or 5 year plan. He has an eternal plan. He sees it all. And many times we get impatient and we want instant victory. We want everything to happen right now. We want God to come through right now. And many times God has us in this healing process, and God's saying, I got you in the waiting room, but it's going to happen, but you just need to be patient. God has us in this miracle process where he's building our faith and he's getting us ready. He's preparing us for this great position. He's developing us for our destiny, and when we get frustrated, we want it now. And God says, I want you to see the eternal view. I want you to synchronize your hearts with eternal standard time and see the big picture so you can make great decisions in the here and now. I'm so thankful God has the eternal view. Delays never destroy God's plan. Delays never destroy God's plan. Hey, a delay is not a denial. There's a big difference between no and not yet. For those of you who are parents, you understand this. There's a big difference between telling your kids no and not yet. It's just not time yet. And a delay is not a denial. We see it all through scriptures. God told Noah to build a boat that would save his family from a great flood, but it didn't rain for 120 years. God told Abraham he'd be the father of a great nation, but he didn't have his first child until he was 99 years old. God told Moses that he would lead the people out of slavery from Egypt. They'd been in for over 450 years. But then God sends Moses out into the desert for 40 years to wait. God gives Joseph this great dream that he'll save his family and his people from famine, and he'll be a great leader. But then Joseph gets sold into slavery. He gets falsely accused and imprisoned, and he's waiting there in prison until finally God takes him from prison and positions him second in command in all of Egypt. And the promise comes true. King David, God had King David anointed as king, but he didn't really get to be king until years later. Even Jesus Christ spent his first 30 years waiting in a carpentry shop before he started his earthly ministry. See, a delay is not a denial. Sometimes God's not saying no, he's just saying not yet. It's not time yet, and God's timing is always perfect. And sometimes there's a door in front of me that I know God is going to open. I've been praying about it. I know it's God's will. God's spoken to my heart. You're going to walk through that door, and I try to walk through the door, and the door's locked. And I want to knock the door down. It's like, God, I know this is a good thing. I know this is of you. And God's saying, not yet. Yeah, yes, it is. This is what I want for you, but not yet. Not yet. And when I finally walk through the door, when he opens it wide and I walk through, then I see it on the other side. It's like, of course, God, if I would have come through too soon, then the blessing wouldn't have been there. God, your timing is perfect. There's so many times in my life where I've wanted to knock a door down and get out of the waiting room of life and just bust out of the waiting room of life. And God keeps the door closed. And then later on, years later, I go, God, thank you that you didn't open that door for me at that time. I mean, I would have missed out totally. I would have settled for the good and missed out on your best. Many times when we make those decisions in the moment, we settle for good and we miss out on God's best. But God always knows his timing is always perfect. After Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, the whole earth cried out for redemption. And God promised redemption was on its way, but it was thousands of years later until the first Christmas when the Redeemer was born. And in Galatians 4:4 it says, but when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. Underline that phrase, but when the set time had fully come. The first Christmas was the perfect time. It was a long wait, but it was worth the wait. And here's a principle of life, a biblical principle you can apply personally. The longer the wait, the bigger the blessing. That's the way it is with God's blessings. The longer the wait, the bigger the wave. And some of you have been waiting for God to come through, and you're about to give up, and you're getting discouraged. And God says, no, just be patient. It won't be overdue a single day. You're in the waiting room of life, and you're going, God, what are you doing? This makes no sense. God is just getting ready to bring in the big wave of blessing. The longer the wait, the bigger the wave, and it's on its way. It's on its way. Hold on. Expect that wave, because you can count on it. It's coming.